Now, we've got about 2 minutes past, so I'm going to go ahead and just kind of start walking us through a few things and give you guys, again, just a heads up of what to expect in this session. And as a few more kind of wander in with us, they'll be able to slide right in. But again, thank you for taking time out of your day to join this skin theory session. During this session, we're going to be talking about a few of the different functions of the skin. I'm going to give you a nice, handy little way to remember those functions and keep that in mind. Also going to go through the composition, or in other words, the layers of the skin. So I've brought a few different supplies with me today. We are going to build a model of the skin using just some things you could probably find in your own pantry or kitchen area if you want to help yourself remembering these layers of the skin as well. So we're going to dive into that as we go through. So I'll be kind of toggling between some of the information on screen, and then also switching over to the camera so you guys can see a little bit of what I'll be building back and forth. But we'll also break down some information on pigmentation, having a good understanding of that. And of course, as it really helps impact all of this impacts our industry, but also looking at the types of skin, being able to identify those so we know how we can work on those, across cosmetology, barbering, aesthetics, nails. Like, we all touch the skin at some point in time, whether it's the skin of the hands, the skin of the face, the skin of the scalp, skin of the body. Like, we all have the ability to impact and touch the skin. So we'll definitely be, understanding those types help us cater our services to those guests even more, uniquely to them. For those of you, again, that are joining me or have not been in a session before, just take a moment to introduce myself. My name's Daniel Dunworth. I'm a learning engagement and development manager for Pivot Point International. So I work a lot on the education development side. It doesn't really explain a whole lot, but I help write and design a lot of the education, also some of the activities and different components that live within the Pivot Point program. So you can always find me out and about with that kind of information. But I'm also here to help you guys out with your student content. So if you guys have questions as we go through this, I just want to make sure that everyone that's on the session live with me knows where they can ask the Q&A. So I'm going to go ahead and just put Q&A right here. Oh, can't spell, in the chat. So I'm going to post that over into the chat. That way, hopefully you all see that notification. And again, feel free to ask me any questions as we go through this and jump to it. But like I said, what I'm really excited about is to help you guys out with a few ways to remember some of these different layers. That's usually the tricky part, is the skin being as kind of complex as it is. Has a lot of different pieces that we need to remember, from the functions to the layers. So my goal is to help you guys be able to remember this a little bit easier. So with that, let's go ahead and start talking a bit about the skin, kind of diving into it. Like I said, a few of the things we're going to go through is jumping into the functions. I've got a trick to help you remember that. We're going to go through those different layers, talk about protection, and really kind of get into those skin types. And that's hopefully by the end of this session, you guys will check some of these off of your list. Now, with the skin, we all have it, right? We all have it. Some of us may have really good skin. Some of us may have maybe not so good skin. And we're plagued by these different challenges, from acne to scars to imperfections to extra pigment to dryness. Our skin, as amazing as it is, also has some pretty unique features to it that can cause issues for many of us. And the more that we understand about the skin, really what it's made of, how it produces itself, and things to consider, can not only help us now, but down the road, as our skin begins to age, as we work on guests of different ages. There's a lot of different things that we've got to factor that can impact our guests, but also impact ourselves, and maybe give us a few tricks to help ourselves out. With this, let's think about the skin itself. I mean, it is pretty fantastic. It is, again, it's a very unique structure of the body. In my opinion, I find it to be one of the most unique. Number one, the skin itself, of course, is also an organ, and it's the only organ that really lives completely externally, covering up our entire body. When most people think of organs, they think about the things that are inside our body, our guts and everything that's in there. But I always find it pretty fascinating that the skin itself is actually an organ of the body, but it just lives on the outside. The average adult's skin can span about 21 square feet. your skin itself, if we were to kind of like the good old like Tom and Jerry cartoons and just strip your skin off your body, which I'm not encouraging anyone to do, but I always think about those cartoons where that stuff happens. Your skin weighs 9 pounds, right, on average. And you have over 11 miles of blood vessels just in your skin. I mean, and you think about that with how thin the skin actually is and everything that's inside of it, not just miles on miles on miles of blood vessels, but also the constant reproduction that's going on, the other glands that are inside of it. I don't know. I think the skin itself is pretty unique and fascinating. A few other things that are kind of interesting for those of us that, maybe never think about it until you go around dusting your home, but your skin sheds around 30 to 40,000 cells every single minute. I mean, did you know, talking about dusting your home since I brought that up, that a good portion of the dust you see around your house actually can contain skin cells? Like that's also things like when they talk about dust mites and stuff like that, that's a lot of like what they eat, right? Is they live off of those exfoliated cells from your body. On average, again, every individual, each month, the skin has pretty much completely replaced itself. You're almost on like a 30-day cycle on average, right? So, and it's not always like, June, May 1st to May 30th or 31st or however many days are in May, but right, it's not like it's a perfect cycle like that, but every single month, roughly every 30 days, your skin has completely replaced itself, right? So that's, I think, also pretty interesting and things to consider, especially when we talk about the impacts of our industry, that there's a lot of services that we perform on one day, maybe if we're doing a facial or we're doing any type of scalp treatments or, any type of impact to the skin of the hands when working and nails, that what you may be trying to take care of right now, you may not see direct benefits from it until this skin has gone through its cycle, which again can be right around 30 days. So you've got to think about that. And even at home, I mean, has anyone ever replaced a product that, you weren't happy with, maybe a certain skincare? Maybe it was a hand lotion, maybe it was a face wash, maybe it was anything like that. Have you ever replaced a skincare product and like almost within a week or two, you really felt a bit unhappy with it? But when you stuck it out and you continue to use it, that by week 3 or week 4, you started to see those changes, right? Have you ever noticed that, right? That sometimes you've got to go through that cycle of using a product for so long to actually see the benefits of it. That just because maybe you swap out your lotion, your face wash or anything like that, your exfoliating body bars, whatever it may be, you may not actually see those benefits for several weeks. Same thing goes for any type of pills or anything that you may take. That when you start to consume or change what you put into your body, your skin can be pretty much a mirror of that, right? It's going to reflect it. But once it goes into your body, because it'll hit the lowest layers of your skin and take around 30 days, all right, and 1 month to reach the surface level, you won't see those changes of what you yourself are putting into your body until it's had time to cycle through your skincare. Your skin. So, working with that, skincare, sometimes you have to give it some time. Another fascinating thing, right? Every square inch, right? So 1 square inch holds up to around 300 sweat glands. That's a lot. It's a lot of sweat, right? And some areas have higher concentrations, while some may have lower, but we'll also talk about that because that's something, of course, that, we ourselves can really impact. Working with skincare, there's a few different, levels of how you can work with it. And the first is dermatology, or becoming even a dermatologist, right? What is dermatology versus the difference of, aesthetics or esteology, right? Dermatology is the study of skin, its structure, the functions, diseases, and also treatments. When we look at aesthetics and going into being like an esthetician, right? This is all about cleansing, toning, moisturizing, protecting, and enhancing the skin. Not necessarily, the big difference there is actually being part of the treatment process. While we may offer skincare treatments, those really are all about either protecting the current state of the skin or trying to enhance the skin. we don't typically do things that go into the body and actually begin to change the functions, the diseases, or act as an actual treatment to certain things. We work with enhancing or trying to enhance that skin. Again, as mentioned, the skin itself is the largest organ of the body. It does cover the entire body, the only really major external organ like that. But another important piece is that, of course, the skin helps protect from those invasive type of particles, products, things that can be outside of the body. Of course, and this comes all the way down to things like, bacteria, viruses, germs. Like, all our skin is designed to protect us from all this, designed to protect us from sunlight. That's why our bodies actually tan, right? And that's why different regions of the world have different skin colors, because a lot of that is all down to the pigment in our skin that is designed to help protect us, right? That's what the skin is all about. It's all about protection. So we've got to know how can we really work with that, and, and what makes up the skin. So let's start out with these. As mentioned before, the skin itself has 6 basic functions that we really want to be mindful of, that that play a part in the skin doing its job. And an easy way to remember these 6 functions is by the word shapes. And I always think about that, well, when the skin covers your body, the skin really is in all different shapes. So if you use that word shapes, which you can see on the screen here, running right down the left-hand side, shapes, S-H-A-P-E-S, stands for each one of the different functions, right? Starting out the first one, sensation. Sensation is all about that kind of touch. It's about being able to sense things like heat, cold, pain, pressure. Every time that you push on something and you sense that it's hard, that's your skin at work, right? Every time that you grab something out of the stove without an oven mitt on and you feel that it burns, well, that is your skin function at work. Our skin is designed to protect us through the sensation function, because it sends us that reading, those pain readings of hot, cold, pressure, sharp, through our nerves as a warning. Stop touching it. It's hot, right? So sensation, of course, is one line of defense that the skin offers us as a function through all the different nerves that can be found within it. Heat regulation is another one. We sweat to help regulate our body temperature, right? We secrete sweat to cover our bodies in moisture, and that helps regulate our body's temperature. When you start to get too hot, your body starts to sweat. That is it attempting to actually cool itself down. So sweat is a good thing. Of course, sometimes we can over sweat, which can be a challenge. Sometimes we under sweat, which can also be just as much of a challenge. But sweat also can release a lot of toxins, right? So that's part of what we'll get to a little bit later on when we think about that role of sweat. It's not just temperature control, but there are other benefits. We go to the A for absorption. The skin does allow things to pass in as well as it does to pass out, right? Think of when you put lotions, moisturizers, and things like that on your skin can actually help absorb that and pass it through into the body, which offers us a beneficial way to receive different valuable nutrients that can be put right on there. So not only can the skin excrete things like sweat and oil, but it also allows things to pass through it. It's a pretty important gatekeeper, to be quite honest. Another one of the functions that the skin performs is protection. Of course, when we see things like bruises, light, things like tanning, all of that kind of stuff, when your skin starts to change colors, all levels of different protection that it offers, because the skin will try to absorb that blow, right? Not to confuse with absorption, but it will try to protect you from a blow by being soft and pliable, and as that skin gets a little weaker, and quite, not to use, unfortunately, something that may seem a little negative, I don't know, but as we get older, our skin doesn't protect us as much. You can notice that the skin becomes more delicate as the body, bruises a little more easily. But protection is a big part of that skin. So the healthier that we can keep our skin, the more protected it can keep us. For those of us, especially that are working in, this field of working on other people, right now, keeping your skin, especially on your hands, protected, keeping them well moisturized, is going to be really important, because if your skin begins to dry and crack, those cracks, those little fissures in your skin can actually expose you to so many more bacteria and viruses. Going in and biting off the skin around your nails, if you are happen to be a, like person like to just bite the hangnails off, you chew a little hard and you start to expose more of that raw tissue, you're exposing yourself to more of those viruses, bacteria. And of course, right now, there's plenty of viruses you don't want to be exposed to. But think about that protection. It's really important. We also have to be mindful that what many of us sometimes consider to be very beautiful and attractive, you think about those beautiful suntans, that's your body reacting to light to actually protect itself. So what we may do for cosmetic, appeal actually is a body's defensive mechanism we're putting into place. So be mindful of that protection. The more that you sometimes may possibly abuse it, you over clean your hands, you actually strip all of the moisture away from your hands, you're actually exposing, you're removing some of that protection. For any of you that might have also attended my pH session last week, we talked about the acid mantle and the importance of that pH balance on the skin. You've got to be pretty mindful of that. The other one we have here, as far as a function goes, is excretion. Excretion is how our body can eliminate wastes. Now, if anyone here might have ever had, one of those, let's just call it a long night, and the next day you really felt like you had to kind of sweat it out, or you've ever been really sick, right? And you just, once you kind of sweat out that sickness, you actually felt a little better, because your body can release toxins through things like sweat that can help eliminate those wastes. So sweat does not only just allow you to maintain body temperature, but again, looking at how it can eliminate wastes, consuming a lot of water, so your body has the ability to be hydrated, but also to be able to produce that additional sweat when necessary, can be a great function to the skin. So, sweat, while you may not be a fan of it, sweat can be very beneficial. The very last function is secretion. So to finish out shapes, the very last S, secretion, again, putting out oil. Now, many of us, of course, may not be big fans of having oily skin. If you're someone like myself that has suffered from excessively oily skin, you may know that sometimes you're very susceptible to breakouts, acne and things like that, and you absolutely hate the idea of oily skin. But do keep in mind that oil is good for your skin. Of course, it's all about balance. That by your body secreting that oil, otherwise known as sebum, that is what keeps your body really soft, supple, pliable, bounceable, and in good shape to help out with the rest of the functions. So for anybody, and again, I'll use this as an example, anybody that may have maybe a little bit more of that natural oily skin, and you just, in the morning, in the evening, you just want to scrub like crazy. You want to get out those face wipes and just dry your skin to the bone. Know that when you're also drying your skin out to the bone, your body's going to try to react to that. Your body's going to say, holy smokes, I'm really dry right now. I need to not be dry, because that's not good for the skin to be dry. So it actually starts to produce more of that sebum or more of the oil. So again, remember, it's all about balance. While you may not want your skin to be overly sweaty or overly oily, you also don't want it to be dried out, because you could trigger excess production, but you're also leaving it exposed to a lot more things if you don't have that natural balance to the skin. And again, things like sweat and oil mixing together, those, when they're nice and balanced on the skin, can help us give us that, protective layer of that acid mantle, that 4.5 to 5.5 pH range, which is really, really good for it. So with that, now that you know a few about those, I'm actually going to come back really quick on this. But again, just to reinforce, easy way to remember these is just the word shapes. If you ever had to come down and be like, all right, what are these functions of the skin? Write down shapes and start thinking about that, all right? Sensation. What can your skin, it can touch things, right? Sensation. I sweat, all right? And I sweat to cool down. That's heat regulation. We look at absorption, right? If I put things on my skin, it's got to go somewhere because the skin can absorb it. Protection, right? It's there to protect us from everything outside of us. Excretion, again, it excretes, right? It leaks out that sweat, that oil. and some secretion, right? That oil, again, production that helps keep that skin extra protected. So sensation, heat regulation, absorption, protection, excretion, and secretion. Those are the 6 basic functions of the skin we want to be mindful of. Again, you can remember that by remembering the word shapes. So with that, let's talk a little bit further. Unless you guys have any questions, I'm keeping an eye on the chat. I haven't seen any questions come through, but if you've got questions about those, feel free to put them out there. But let's also talk about the actual composition of the skin, the different layers. And that's where I get to start getting my little goodie bags here, ready for our little experiment. So we're going to talk about these, and I'll kind of toggle this on and off between, again, what you'll see in the skin, but then also what I want to use for some representation of it. Again, I just raided my pantry and brought out some of the materials that I use to actually represent the skin. I've been doing this. I kind of consider it like an edible layers of the skin, but it helps you remember it by just different representations of these different ones. Hopefully, I don't ruin anyone's favorite breakfast cereal or snack by what I model it as, but we're going to dive right into this food. And, if you all dare me hard enough, I might even take a bite of it at the end. We'll see how that goes. So there are 3 main layers of the skin that we kind of need to be aware of. And then some of these kind of have these other pieces that make it up. But these 3 main layers include the epidermis, the dermal layer, or the dermis, and then also the subcutaneous tissue. So we're going to break down each one of these, and we're actually going to work from the bottom up. That way we can also build these out. So working with each one of these, what I want to start out with, actually, I'm sorry, before I even go forward, I want to talk about this subcutaneous tissue. We're not going to go too deep into it, but subcutaneous tissue, I'm going to use here as kind of like my my little Rice Krispie treat, and I'll pull my camera out in just a moment, but the subcutaneous tissue really is a fatty layer to the skin. Again, it kind of gives it its bounce and a little extra of its pliability. Without that subcutaneous tissue, your skin would almost like saran wrap around your bones and muscles, and you would see that type of definement. I mean, to be quite honest, if you've ever really seen someone that has gone on extreme weight loss, and you will actually describe them that they look like skin and bones, because without those bits of fatty layer that we need, it does look like our skin can almost be vacuum sealed around our bones. You start to see these nooks and crannies that you don't typically see on healthy skin, right? So that fatty layer, which is going to be represented by a little rice treat here, because it's nice and spongy, right? This is going to be my subcutaneous tissue, but then we're going to start building into this. So the next layer that I really want to dive deeper into is the dermal layer. The dermal layer itself is mostly composed of keratin cells. Now, we've talked about keratin before. You're probably very familiar with keratin itself. Keratin is the protein that makes up hair, skin, and nails. As I mentioned before, that the dermal layer often is also called the dermis, right? Kind of we have the epidermis and then the dermis. So also can be referred to as the derma, the corium, the cutis, or what many people even say is the true skin, because this is the good majority of what, if you were to think of your skin almost as like I guess a multi-layered sandwich or burger or something like that, like the cutis, the cutis or the dermal layer, this is the meat. This is what you want to be the thickest part. This is really, it's about 25 times thicker than the epidermis. Now, when many of us think about skin, we commonly think about the dermis, and we proactively typically try to treat the epidermis. But when working, the dermis here, right, this dermal layer is really what a lot of the visible signs even come from. What we sometimes distinguish as, really healthy looking skin, it all starts down here in this dermal layer. This dermal layer is important. It helps actually connect the skin to the subcutaneous tissue. It keeps it bonded. Again, part of that pliability and that looseness. The dermal layer becomes really important to people, especially as they go through the aging process, because the dermal layer is where your elasticity is found. Again, kind of that bouncy factor to it. That as you age, sometimes this dermal layer just doesn't maintain that elasticity, and that's what starts to show some signs of aging: sagging skin, wrinkles, all of that is quite a bit more visible down in this dermal layer. So the healthier that we can maintain the skin, the better and longer lasting that this dermal layer will stay in a healthy state. Now, this dermal layer does have two other kind of, we'll call them almost sub-layers to a degree, the papillary and also the reticular layer. I'm going to share a few details on this with you, and then I'm going to show you what we'll be using to represent the dermal layer here. Now, again, in the dermal layer, these two, the papillary and then the reticular layer. A few key points to remember about the papillary layer. This one here is kind of the top layer, while the reticular layer is the bottom layer of it, right? The top and bottom of this dermis. The papillary layer is where a lot of your capillaries, I kind of think of those together, right? Papillary, capillary. This is where your blood vessels live. So blood vessels live a little higher towards the surface of the skin, right? So looking at that, the papillary is a lot more responsible for things like when you see bruising take place. That will happen primarily more in this papillary layer because that's where those blood vessels are, and that's what causes a bruise, right? Broken blood vessels. In the papillary layer is where you also have more of your nerve endings. All of these different what are called tactile corpuscles. This is what's responsible for your sensitivity to touch and to also, that feel pain, stuff like that. In the lower layer of the dermis is the reticular layer. This here is what really kind of bonds it right to that subcutaneous tissue, but again, becomes important because this is where things like collagen and those elastin fibers live. Again, what keeps skin looking very supple and young. As that collagen breaks down over time, those elastin fibers weaken. This is the layer that starts to show more signs of aging through sagging skin, fine lines, and wrinkles. You also have the sudoriferous and sebaceous glands. We'll talk more about those a little bit later, but those are your sweat and oil glands. Again, you have additional blood vessels. You also have what's known as the erector pili muscle. That muscle right there, if you aren't familiar, that's what is responsible for giving you goosebumps. So when you see that erector pili muscle actually contract, those goosebumps are what are left raised up when that muscle, that erector pili muscle contracts, tightens up, and pulls the skin in. And again, that's what's responsible for goosebumps, if that's what you call it. Now for this, I'm gonna go ahead and just do a quick pause here. If I just gonna, let's see, stop the share. Hopefully this kind of brings it back over to me now. But working with it, we've got the little rice cake here for nice, spongy, soft subcutaneous tissue. What I'm going to use to represent the dermal layer, because it's elastic, it's got that sticky factor for keeping the upper layers connected to the bottom layers, I'm going to use peanut butter. All right, so I'm going to think peanut butter here. Lots of protein in it, right? So peanut butter is what we're going to use. I'm just going to spread this all over my rice cake here. This is what we're going to use in our model of the skin to represent that, again, nice, young, healthy, smooth. Well, I do have fine lines and wrinkles. I'm not a very good peanut butter spreader, but right, think about how smooth you can spread peanut butter. That is, again, this dermis is what gives you that smooth, young, healthy looking skin. And again, because like peanut butter is sticky, we know that the dermal layer or dermis is responsible for helping upper layers of the skin stick to the subcutaneous tissue. I love peanut butter, so I'm actually going to go ahead and put a little extra on here. So now we've got the sticky factor. You guys with me so far on that one? And I get every bit of it. There we go. Set that off to the side. So we've got fatty rice cake, nice and spongy, subcutaneous. Then we've got peanut butter, all right? And that's gonna give us our nice little sticky dermal layer. So with that, let's go ahead and talk about a few of the additional layers of the skin. Switch on back over. And now we're gonna start breaking down the epidermis. So the epidermis is what lives above the dermis. One more time, subcutaneous tissue, fatty. Dermis, or our true skin, that healthy, smooth looking appearance really comes from that dermis. And then we've got the epidermis. Epidermis is the very top layer. The epidermis is quite typically what we spend most of our time working on, trying to enhance or help prevent different challenges. So in the epidermis, this is the outermost layer of the skin. However, the epidermis itself actually has multiple layers within it that we're going to continue to build out. There are no actual blood vessels in this epidermis. I mean, have any of you ever cut yourself, but it actually never bled? Have you ever experienced that? You might have just got that little bit of a snag and you waited for it, never bled. You know, a lot of times it's because that cut only went through that epidermis, right? It never actually penetrated into the dermal layer, which is where the blood vessels actually live. So that's why it's possible to cut yourself without bleeding, because if you're only breaking the epidermis, you won't actually bleed. There's no blood vessels here. Many times the epidermis is known as the cuticle of the skin because it's the outermost layer covering, just like the cuticle of the hair. The epidermis itself is completely made of keratinocytes or epithelial cells, which are those kind of, quite honestly, dead keratin cells. The epidermis is pretty much preparing itself for full replacement. It's preparing itself to shed off. So again, as mentioned before, the epidermis itself made up of 5 layers. Now, keep this in mind, that the epidermis, right, compared to the dermis, the epidermis is really thin, that the dermal layer is 25 times thicker than this epidermis. But we're really going to stretch it out in our images so that way we can really talk about each one of these different layers. So let's break down the epidermis and what's found in here. And again, I've got different items to help represent each of those. These 5 layers, I like to go from the bottom up when we talk about this, but we have the stratum basal layer, okay? Stratum basal. This basal layer is where a lot of our cell growth takes place. Just so you guys know, we are going to be using some Apple Jacks to represent our stratum basal layer, and there's reasons why I chose Apple Jacks. We also have the stratum spinosum. This one here, very easy to remember for me, it's the spiny layer, right? This one here is going to be represented by, where do I have it? Oh, right on top. We're going to represent this with raisins, because raisins, after we get to the stratum spinosum, when they start to get a little rougher, right? Raisins have a rougher texture than some of our kind of fruit cereal here. We're also going to then move into the stratum granulosum, which the word gran kind of reminds me of the word grain, and that's what these cells are like. They're like little tiny grains at this point. So we're going to be using some granola pieces to represent that layer. And then from there, we're going to also talk about the uniqueness of the stratum lucidum. This here really only lives in certain areas. We're going to be using some honey to represent the lucidum. And then our very last layer, the stratum corneum. This one here, we're going to be using cornflakes to represent that corneum. So with that, that's going to be the kind of process we go through to build this out and represent each one of these. But let's start breaking it down. Starting out again at the bottom. The basal layer here. This stratum basal is also known as the stratum germinativum. And for anyone here that's ever done any type of like gardening or anything like that, we know many times that seeds have to germinate, right? And that means that they have to prepare themselves for growth and, you know, reproduction, all that kind of stuff. And that's what the stratum germinativum is all about. This is where these cells start to kind of transform. They start to grow a little bit differently. They go through, again, this cell division. It's replacing itself at this point in time. So the basal is where, if you remember earlier, we talked about that 30-day cycle of the skin. The basal layer here, or the germinativum, is where it starts. You have these cells that are constantly reproducing, and then they just push themselves up, almost like a Play-Doh machine. Starts at one end, always coming out the other, and that's what this germinativum is all about. When working as they reproduce, those skin cells move upwards. Now, because of that reproduction, if your skin cells reproduce quickly, that's why you can sometimes have that excessive shedding, or if they produce a little bit slower, sometimes you can actually have cell buildup. There's a lot of different factors that go into this. This germinativum or basal layer is where we see a lot of our keratinocytes happen. Again, think keratin, right? That's the protein that makes up our skin, hair, and nails. We also have melanocytes here, or again, if you're familiar with that word melanin, you've probably heard it a number of times by now. But melanocytes are what produce that melanin that give skin its color. So working with this is why I'm going to choose to use Apple Jacks in my model representation here. And I'm going to go ahead and just pause this screen sharing for a moment so I can focus in just on my camera. And if you give me just a moment here and spotlight that video, there we go. That I'm choosing Apple Jacks because, you know, one, there's a couple different colors to it, which can help represent a couple different, you know, types of melanin, you know, pheomelanin, eumelanin, you know, and that. But I do like it because Apple Jacks, I choose this because if we go into that camera, right, Apple Jacks have those little like color pigments that are on there. I really don't know exactly what that's for, but that helps me represent the melanocytes. So we're going to take our Apple Jacks, all right, our germinativum, and we're going to go ahead and sprinkle that all over our dermal layer, right? Peanut butter was our dermal layer. So there we go. We now have, again, if we look, I'm going to spread these out evenly. There we go. Let the OCD try to not kick in too hard. But we now have a fatty tissue, subcutaneous tissue. We've got the peanut butter to represent that dermal, right? That nice smooth but also sticky layer. We now have Apple Jacks to represent this germinativum. All different types of colors that can be available here and the little dots of melanocytes that live all around. So we've got that foundation to our skin starting to appear. Hopefully you guys are all with me on that one so far. Beyond the germinativum, right, talking a little further about these melanocytes, one thing to really kind of keep in mind that these guys, again, produce that melanin. And remember that melanin itself is a protective measure of the skin. While it gives all of us our different color, whether you're, you know, depending on the blend of pheomelanin or eumelanin that your skin, hair, and your entire body may have, really keep in mind that melanin is a protective feature of the skin. When exposed to sunlight, UV light, right, like tanning beds, there's a reason why your skin gets darker. There's a reason why people whose, you know, their history, their genealogy comes from those areas that are closer to the equator naturally have darker skin tones. And that's because being close to the equator, you're actually closer to the sun. Right? It's why it's hotter there. And because of that, you needed that extra layer of defense. You need that extra pigmentation to protect you from that. And that's why those people that may have fairer skin tones, when you go tanning, why your body actually begins to get darker is because that is a defensive mechanism you're triggering in the skin that is causing your skin to get darker so it can block those UV lights from penetrating deeper into your body. UV light can be damaging to tissue. So the melanin is trying to protect you from those rays. All right. So think about that. You know, I mean, if you guys, what is it? It's something about Mary. I mean, I know maybe not everyone may be familiar with these, but there's the one lady in Something About Mary that is, I mean, she's got like that leathery alligator skin because she's like always tanning. And her skin just, I mean, it looks like beef jerky because it's just been so damaged by sun rays. That keep that in mind. That's what those rays do. And your body's trying to tell you, hey, I'm getting darker because I'm trying to protect you. So if you don't naturally have those pigments to you, you are causing damage. That's what tanning is. So be mindful of that. If you want to stay youthful and young looking, you actually want to protect yourself from the sun. So again, keep this in mind. There is that very basic melanin pigment that everyone has, again, being a mixture of eumelanin or pheomelanin, right? Darker light pigments. We also have sometimes the ability to have hyperpigmentation that can come in. And again, that's like tanning. Tanning is a hyperpigmentation. But sometimes you may even have a hyperpigmentation that naturally makes your skin look darker. But you can also have, without going into skin diseases, disorders, conditions, stuff like that, you can even have a hypopigmentation, which is where you actually have lighter spots of skin across your body. So melanin can be rather tricky. From there, though, we then have the next layer. Let's talk about the stratum spinosum. This here, that spiny layer, the stratum spinosum starts to work beyond. So the melanin is being produced and is apparent there in the basal layer. As it starts to move up into the spinosum, this is where a lot more of that visible melanin absolutely lives, which is why it's possible that, why does your tan go away after so long? I mean, if you ever were to stop tanning, you may notice that over the course of 30 days is about how long it takes you to get there, because that melanin moves up to the spinosum and progressively moves its way off. Now, the spinosum, the way that I remember this, has a very spiny or rough shape, right? I think a little spines all across it. So with that, yet again, I'm going to go ahead and just switch on over to my camera here. But to represent the spinosum, guys, I'm going to go ahead and grab some raisins, right? Raisins, I choose this for two reasons to represent the spinosum. Number one, they already have a little bit of a darker color. So I think about, if we've been tanning, or wherever that melanin choice of the body may be at this point in time, they have the pigment established more inside of them. But raisins, of course, also have, let's zoom it in. For those of you that have never heard or seen a raisin before, raisins have a pretty rough and irregular shape or texture to them. Hopefully you've seen raisins, right? If you haven't, stop eating junk food. But raisins have that spiny, rough, irregular shape. So we're going to take those raisins and we are going to spread them all over the next layer of the skin here. I probably should have picked a bigger pack, but that's okay. So now we've got, I can just go ahead and pick that up. I guess hopefully I don't spill it all over my keyboard, but we've got our fatty layer, right? We've got our dermal layer, smooth peanut butter. We've got our basal layer, or where the little tiny melanocytes live. That's our apple jacks. And now we've got our rough, irregular, spiny shaped raisins, right? That's our spinosum right there on the top. All right. And again, the big thing that starts to happen here is while the germinativum or that basal layer can be a bit smoother, we're starting to see the skin transform into the rougher texture that those cells will get. And again, more melanin is visible here. So hopefully you guys are good with that. I'm going to do a quick chat scan here. I haven't looked at it in just a minute, so let me do a quick look over that one. Looks like we're doing okay. Again, remember, if you've got any questions, feel free to put them out there. But let's talk about the granulosum, right? The next layer. So now we're up, starting at the bottom. If we started the basal germinativum, we went to layer number 2, the spinosum, and now layer number 3, the granulosum. Here, the skin has actually started to get even rougher in appearance. The skin cells have started to become maybe a little bit more compact. Again, just wear and tear on the skin as they begin to keratinize even further. But working with it, these skin cells actually look like small little granules, and sometimes I'll even, in my own representation, things like Fruity Pebbles would even be a good idea with that. Today, I happen to have some granola flakes in here, so we're going to be using that as that representation. But these granules here are really on their way to that skin surface. So again, they're starting to become more compact, rougher, even possibly just a little bit drier at this point in time, really getting pushed up to the skin surface. Going through that keratin, now that these cells are that much more dead, again, keratinized, hardened, of course, that also helps factor into that layer of protection that our skin has. So it's important for skin to go through that keratinization process because it needs to toughen up a little bit to give us a tougher skin, right? So this granulosum is really important in that extra layer of protection. So again, one more time, these here are starting to smooth out, flatten out. So that's why I'm going to sprinkle some of these on the side. This is why I started to choose more of these little granules, right? Smaller little cells that are starting to get compact, get harder, toughen up. So we started with soft raisins. We're now at hard granules. I'm going to go ahead and sprinkle that across my skin here and add that next layer. I really am wondering whether or not I'm not going to lie, it kind of smells pretty good. So we'll see. Maybe I might take a bite of this by the time we're done. But now we've got this layer. And again, it's not a major shift. The biggest thing I'd say to know about the granulosum is the fact that, again, skin is starting to get tougher here, all right? The extra layer of protection. So with that, let's also talk about the lucidum. The lucidum is a bit unique. The lucidum layer here is really only visible in a few places, and 2 of those are the palms of the hands and the soles of the feet, okay? And of course, if you've ever noticed, like the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet are definitely a tougher skin. It's also unique because where this lucidum is found, there's also no hair follicles that are there, all right? That's why there's no hair that grows on your hand, the palms of your hands, or the soles of your feet. And this lucidum is part of that, that reason for it. With that, because there is no hair that is found, there's no hair follicles, you have no oil glands on the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet. However, you do have more sweat glands that can be found, especially on the palms of the hands, kind of helping to balance that out. So when you think about the lucidum is a bit of a flatter version of the skin cells that is more clear. So working with this, it's, the biggest thing just to know about this lucidum is it's clear. And that's why it's on your palms, soles of the feet. It's that extra layer of protection for those areas of the body that take more abuse, right? And again, here is it because of this that calluses show up more on the hands and the feet? And that's a really good reason, because this lucidum here is that tougher protection, so it can take that abuse and, yes, form things like calluses. Take that abuse because, humans, although we don't do it as much anymore, but, we grew up walking around barefoot, using our hands to have to build and do everything, which we still do. But, back, you're talking, the nomad and the caveman style, we didn't have gloves and shoes and whatnot. And so the body created ways to make those heavily used parts of our body, again, soles of the feet, palms of the hands, to be tougher. And this lucidum is a big reason why they can take that abuse and form things like calluses, rather than just tearing open like a lot of the other parts of the skin do, or getting bruised and getting cut, scratched, broken. This lucidum gives you that toughness in those areas. And that's why on the skin, on the feet, you've got those thicker layers. Now, because it's clear, again, one more time, I'm gonna go ahead and just shrink down for a moment here. Because the lucidum is clear, I'm gonna go ahead and use honey to represent that lucidum. Now remember, one more time, this layer is only found on the palms of the hands and the soles of the feet. But we're gonna go ahead and just put some honey all over this guy to represent that lucidum, if it's there. But one more time, it is not. Now, a quick question to the chat, just to see if you're paying attention. I mentioned that where that lucidum is, all right, that extra layer of skin, that there is a few things that are not present on the palms of the hands and the soles of the feet. Can you name me one of the two things I said that cannot be found on the palms of the hands or the soles of the feet? Go ahead and put that in the chat right now if you can remember either of those. Someone has already challenged me to take a big bite of that rice cake. I'm pretty tempted to. I love peanut butter. I love honey. The rest of it is a hodgepodge of sugar, so we'll see how it goes. Again, keep an eye on the chat. Those of you that have posted already, you guys spot on. Two of the things that cannot be found on the palms of the hands and the soles of the feet are hair follicles and oil glands, right? So good job on that one there. Kudos for picking up those facts. But let's keep going. Let's talk a little bit more about some of these other layers of the skin here. Beyond the lucidum, we now have the stratum corneum. This one I remember, again, with the use of cornflakes, right? And I think of this because the stratum corneum flakes off. Well, and cornflakes are flakes, right? So we're going to use cornflakes to represent this. Now, if you got a little bit drier, slightly ashier skin, maybe frosted flakes might be more up your alley. Try to ruin as many breakfast cereals as I can. But cornflakes is what we're going to use here to represent that skin that is now flaking and shedding off. So the stratum corneum is the uppermost and the toughest layer of the skin. These cells are completely keratinized. They are dead and they are hardened and they are ready to just basically shed off. All right, this is the last layer of that 30-day cycle. If the body is running a regular, healthy routine there, right? Every 30 days, this should roughly come off. But again, that changes over time. So looking at this and thinking about these different layers of the skin, I'm going to jump down to the bottom of the slide here. You can see that there's different stages. You know, when you're a little bit younger, going through puberty, your skin can actually cycle quite a bit faster between, you know, roughly 2 weeks, 12 to 19 days. Roughly 2 weeks, this cycle can constantly be going through because of all the change happening in your body. During the good portion of your life, your midlife time, again, you're going to be looking around that 30 days, about 28 to 35. So it's not everyone's a perfect 30, all right? As you get older and start to become a bit more matured, as your body goes through those changes, your skin can actually hang around for about 90 days. You know, so really being mindful of that is going to be important how you really work with that. And I apologize. I think hopefully this isn't ringing through in the background as well, but I've got someone beeping my computer here. But working with it, so that time period certainly is something to consider. That as you get older, the more that you can take care of your skin now, the better it will be in your older age, especially when that skin's gonna be hanging around longer. So again, one more time to go ahead and represent our layer. I'm not gonna take this off the plate now because now it's dripping honey. But when that skin is ready to flake or shed off, again, that's gonna be represented by these cornflakes, because just like the skin, they are flat, they are hard, right? And they are ready to flake. So we're gonna go ahead and just put those across the skin here and represent those stratum corneum cells that are ready to just flake right off and shed, right? So if the body is nice and healthy, these should actually come off unnoticeable. You shouldn't even really notice that this stratum corneum is shedding if your skin is healthy and going through that regular cycle. Because again, roughly every day, if I'm trying to remember my stat from earlier, but 30 to 40,000 skin cells. And in working with that, every time you rub your arm like this, skin cells are coming off. You just don't typically see them. But if you notice, maybe over the winter when your skin's a little excessively dry, when you actually rub on your arm, you can see like the white powder and stuff like that. That's because those skin cells are so dry, you actually can cause them to just dust and flake off like that visibly. But healthy, balanced skin, again, this one, you shouldn't notice the dryness. If we go back, as I mentioned earlier, there's that acid mantle that helps keep that skin protected. So that acid mantle is important to help you make sure that your skin stays protected, but also that it sheds off naturally and really unnoticed. All right, so that's gonna be really important there. So there we go. We have our layers of the skin. Before I go even deeper than that, we got our different layers of the skin. Just to recap this, I'm gonna come back really quick for a moment to all layers of the skin and just go ahead and switch back over to this one. So all layers of the skin, just to represent our model here, we have the subcutaneous tissue, really, really low part. That's not on this model. Let me go back even a bit further. Here we go. Oh, that's the dermal one. There we go. Subcutaneous tissue, that's our rice cake representation. Spongy, fatty. We've got the dermal layer, which is smooth and also kind of that sticky factor to keep the skin together. That's our peanut butter, right? Then as we start to actually go into our epidermis, which has those sublayers, we've got the stratum basal, which is where little color can be found. That's our apple jacks. We've got the spinosum, or the rough skin cells. Those were our raisins. We've got the granulosum, which is like little grains. That's what the skin is starting to look like, little tiny grains. That's our granola. The lucidum, which is clear, that's represented by the honey we put over. You can't even see it because it's clear. Again, only found on the palms and soles of the feet. And then we also have the stratum corneum, and that's our cornflakes, which all flakes off. So that is our model of the skin. A little bit of honey on the fingers, but again, stay tuned and you can watch me take a big bite of that right at the end. So a few other things I just want to share with you about the, again, the skin and things that can be found in. I think I kind of skipped right past it. Here we go. The sudoriferous gland. All right, two quick glands I just want to talk with you about. Sudoriferous, or sweat glands. Again, these are really important. They help get rid of waste. They help regulate body temperature. But remember that the sweat is important because it makes up part of that acid mantle, that 4.5 to 5.5 pH that's good for the skin to protect it. So keep that in mind. You don't want to not sweat, but of course sweat becomes a problem when you oversweat. And those areas like, again, the palms and soles, your underarms and other areas, even along your forehead, hairline, stuff like that, where you can excessively sweat. And that's because those areas can just sometimes experience even excess temperatures. The other gland that's important to understand is the oil gland, also known as the sebaceous gland, or oil, otherwise known as sebum. Now again, sebum is a part of that acid mantle. It's important for that pH balance, keeping the skin soft and supple. Sebaceous glands are attached to those hair glands, hair follicles, which is why we don't find sebaceous glands or oil on the palms and soles of the feet, because there's no follicle. So again, also keep that in mind. We don't want to have excessively oily skin, but we also can't say, well, we don't want oil, because sebum really is beneficial to the skin. It keeps it soft, it keeps it healthy. If you over dry your skin, it can become brittle, dry, damaged, and age much quicker. And again, all of that, very, very important to understand that whole acid mantle side of things. If you were in the pH class, you've heard this 4.5 to 5.5. And this is something that the skin naturally produces. Again, sweat and oil mixture, the sudoriferous gland and sebum from the sebaceous gland mixed together to help create that barrier, which is so important. And that's why it's important to understand, how to properly clean your hands and cleanse the skin, but not do it to a point where it's drying. And why you also have to keep in mind that, while oily skin, you may need to dry it out, you can't over dry it, or else you're going to trigger that reaction to protect itself, because oil and sweat help protect the body. If you go too strong in one direction, you're going to have challenges. So really kind of keep that in mind of what you can do with that and how we play around with those. One of the last things I want to share with you in our few final moments here is also about skin types. As we go through the industry, and there's a variety of different ways this certainly can be broken down, but I want to share with you a few common skin types that exist, and that's dry, oily, normal, or a combination. Now, of course, there's a lot of different ways in which skin can fall into these categories and what defines it, but I want to look at a lot of the major factors for each one of these. And we're going to start out with dry. Dry skin can easily be identified because it's typically flaking, has that kind of more ashy or dried out look to it. I'd say if there's one benefit to dry skin is it's not typically acne prone. However, one thing that does become a problem with dry skin is it does have the potential to show signs of aging more, because the skin is not as soft and supple, and it doesn't have as strong of that elasticity. So while dry skin, you may have oily skin and wish you had dry skin, typically they also say that oily skin will even show signs of aging later in life. So, there's pros and cons to it. It's all about trying to create balance. Now, when looking at dry skin, what you may not always be able to tell at surface level is what it's lacking. Dry skin could be lacking oil, or it could be lacking moisture, right? So it's important to know that when performing services on guests, it is important to even talk to them about their diet. How much water are they consuming? How much sugar and caffeine are they consuming? Because those types of things can dry your body out. So a lot, if you've ever gone in for a facial, sometimes they may even ask you questions, how many alcoholic beverages do you consume? Because of the tendency for that to also dry your body out, which of course in turn dries your skin out. So keep in mind what you can do to actually balance those. Dry skin doesn't just always have one answer to it, and moisturize. It may not actually be lacking moisture, it may be lacking oil. So we've got to find the balance for those. The other skin type is oily skin. Oily skin also is a little bit easier to identify because it's, quite the opposite of dry, but it actually has a very shiny appearance. Someone with oily skin that while you may cleanse your face in the morning, maybe by mid-morning or midday, you can already start to see that kind of glaze or that reflection to your skin. One of the most common types of oily skin types is what's known as the T-zone oily skin. And that's where you have most of your oil production across your forehead and right down the center of your face, like along the sides of your nose, maybe near your upper lip, your lower lip, and along your chin. That T-zone is one of the most common areas to find that abundance of oil. The one thing, of course, that's a big downer to people that do have oily skin is you're typically a little bit more prone to acne and those types of blackheads, pore congestion, which can last well beyond. It's not just an age thing, a puberty thing. And it's like, wow, how come I'm in my 30s and still suffer from acne? Well, that simply could be because of that oily skin type that you have. So, that's one thing you've got to watch out with that balancing. The next skin type that we'll just talk about here is normal. Of course, normal, while it uniquely enough is considered normal skin, that's because it's pretty much balanced. It doesn't go too far in one direction. It's actually one of the rarest skin types to have. So for those of you that, there may be someone here, and I'd, go ahead and put a yes in the chat if you're lucky enough to have this. You don't wash your face. You don't use anything like that. You don't use face wash. You might just splash your face with water and you've never had a blemish in your life. I absolutely wish I had your skin, but that type of skin that doesn't need to really do anything to it is rare and quite fortunate to have that quote unquote normal skin, because it's not normally found. But normal skin has the right balance of moisture, the right balance of oil. It doesn't really, you don't see large pores, you don't see blemishes as much. It's just almost flawless, right? So that is really what normal skin. The one challenge with normal skin that those people have to be mindful of is maintaining that through age. You may not always have normal skin for all of your life. Now, on the flip side, one of the most common skin types here is combination, where you actually have bits of both. You may have, again, that very shiny and oily T-zone, but it's possible for you to actually have dry skin off to the cheeks, right? Or sometimes even reverse. You might have oily skin maybe near your jaw, right? Along the jawline, the chin area, but then be very dry and flaky across your forehead or even in your upper cheek zone. So with this, really being mindful with it is most people that come to you for a skin service will have a combination skin. And one type of product is not a cure-all. So when you perform things like facials, you do masks, you do anything like that, you won't always get the ability to use just one mask or one cleanser. Sometimes you actually have to use multiple products on your guests to create the most amount of balance. So keep that in mind. While combination is the most skin type, there are many professionals that do not actually use a combination of products to treat their guests. So with that in mind, what I really want to encourage you to do is, one, get to know your skin. And I would even say, build a layer to help you remember. And this could be anything. I've built these out of parfaits, out of crafts, but I like to sometimes build something also quite a bit edible here. But get to know your skin type and get to know your guest's skin type. That while we all may think we suffer from dry skin or oily skin, well, remember that the most common really is normal. So do you maybe have a bit of both? And you should be using a range of products to help you out. So that's what I'm going to leave you with, considering your skin. I'm going to go ahead and take a massive honking bite of this skin layer here. Let's see if we do that. If you guys have any questions on the skin, feel free to post them now in the chat. And I'm going to keep an eye out for that. I'll stop this share and let you guys see me just dive into this thing. This is not going to taste very good. Oh, that's not delicious. Apple Jacks and honey and peanut butter and rice cake. That's really dry. Really dry. I'm glad I brought this glass of water. But if you guys have a question on the skin, feel free to let me know. I took the bite. Actually, the aftertaste isn't that bad. It's very, very peanut buttery. So, I had me some milk. Going straight for the water. Unfortunately, the marshmallow in my cake is a little dried up too, so that didn't even give me much sponge. But thank you guys for joining the session today. I really enjoyed it. Join us again next time, and until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you then.